you ready? Let's go.
When you're feeling bothered and your spirits low, your friends have turned their back and there's nowhere to go. Don't shed a tear, 'cause God will give you hope. If you're curious, then turn on. The Late Show with your number one man. Hope will light your heart. The Late Show, watch it 'cause it can. This is the Late Show starring Matt the
All the way from the land down under, from the heart of Melbourne, the most livable city in the world, the land of the kangaroos and koalas. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome the one and only Matt the Man Unite.
Good evening and welcome to another episode of The Late Show. I'm Matthew Unan and it's great to have your company as always. So, only a week ago, a mate of mine was telling me about this incident that took place at his workplace. He commented on a female colleague's outfit, mentioning that he thought she looked good today. Within minutes, it had escalated and gone straight to HR, and he received an official warning. Poor bloke was so confused and had no idea what he had done wrong. Feeding him. This legend actually has a heart of gold and had no ill intentions at all. Seriously, what is this world coming to if you can't even give someone a genuine compliment without it being misinterpreted? We all experience miscommunication at some point in our lives. At work, with family, with friends, and even with strangers. So, because communication comes in all different forms, we're going to mix things up a bit tonight. But to help us communicate effectively, we're very privileged and delighted tonight to be joined by a professional consultant who specialises in communication and education. She's completed her Masters in Education at Melbourne's most prestigious university, and tonight will educate us on how to perfect the way we communicate with those around us. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome the very lovely Ines Rumsey.
Very, very honourable and distinguished introduction. I don't deserve. Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Ines, thank you very much for your time tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us on the show.
Pleasure, Matthew.
Thanks. Ines, what are some of the tools of effective communication?
Well, before we get into the tools, Matt, I'm going to ask you, why do we communicate?
Well, because we need to express ourselves, don't we?
Yes, why?
To convey a message.
That's true. You've started now unpacking with me communication. We have an innate need to convey ideas, feelings, opinions, facts, cooperate with each other for our survival, and fulfillment.
Yeah.
How easy is it when somebody listens to you and you feel heard, you feel that part of your communication has been satisfied and you feel fulfilled. Now, some of the tools that we need for successful communication can be learned from successful communicators around us. We can look at people like Steve Jobs, Dr. Magdi Yaoub, help me out now, some very successful people in the public arena. Communication takes many different forms. We have verbal communication, I'm talking to you. We have non-verbal communication, I'm smiling at you. So we use a combination of our voice, our facial expression, our body gestures to effectively bring an idea across. And the more that we are aware of those tools, the better we can use them to our advantage. So for example, if I need to speak to a child, I need to bring myself down to their level. I need to have eye-to-eye contact with them, and I need to use my voice in such a way that the message becomes etched in their mind. So if I'm protecting them from a danger, or if I'm trying to educate them about something new, I need to employ all the tools that I have available to me to make sure that my message is going to be etched in their memory, might be important for their survival or whatever. And sometimes I might have to reiterate that message several times before it's coded in their long-term memory. So effective communication is using all the tools that are available to us to pass a message from here to to the other person's brain. And that can be done on an individual basis or on a group level basis, where you have an audience that you're talking to, class, training session, whatever it may be. But we take also lessons from effective communicators. Most successful people in our society are really, really clever communicators. So if we're looking at Steve Jobs, for example, he was such a powerful communicator to his team, to the people that worked and processed his ideas into something that can be realized. So they've become really attuned to how to convey a message from that lives in here, especially with a creative person, into another person's brain. And the more that you can educate yourself on how to make that work for you, the more powerful your message is going to be to your recipient, if you like. So if you look around, people like Professor Magdi Yaoub, one of the effective things I find in his persona is that not only is he an effective communicator, he's a creative person and problem solving. So that too becomes an important thing in communication. On reflection, when you look at how societies developed, if we're looking at the early settings of civilization, from nomadic man to farming communities, you will find that communication and structure that follows from good communication has taken place. So if we, for example, look in ancient Egypt, people moved around hunting and gathering to starting to settle, creating farming communities, irrigation, so forth. That all was really born by good communication. Organising government, delegating roles, who's going to plough, who's going to plant the seeds, who's going to do the manual labour, who's going to harvest, and how they're going to divide the workload. That's all effective communication. If you look today, the most successful companies on the market listed on the stock exchange are those who have good communication or have mastered communication skills. If you look at successful couples in our society, they're couples who have learned the skills of good communication. So communication is really vital in taking us to the next step in our fulfillment and success in our life.
Wow. So, I mean, verbal communication, you touched on, is one form of communication. So how does that impact on the overall communication process?
Well, every tool that we have at our disposal impacts on communication. So if I was to use my voice at the same tone, my recipient would be very bored very quickly because I'd have a monotone voice. So one of the tricks with verbal communication, is to vary your tone of voice according to the message that you want to give. So using your voice tool in an effective way is important.
Absolutely.
Also, picking your words. In our society, we load words very heavily. So if I can give you an example, cheeky monkey expression might be an endearing expression that I might use for someone, and that someone may find it an incredibly offensive expression. Depends on their culture, their upbringing, and depending on how we load those particular words. So being aware of cultural issues, ethnic issues, upbringing issues, age issues, all these things impact on our communication, verbal communication. So the language of young people today was not the same language of young people 20, 30, 40 years ago, and definitely won't be in 20 years' time.
Yeah, and I suppose that's why perception is a really important thing, because what one person is trying to convey may not be the message that the other person is receiving.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think are really important is that when you are communicating, you really have to give your full attention, and you need to ensure that your recipient also gives you their full attention, and that your mind has to be very focused on what it is that you're trying to communicate.
But what about multitasking? Like, you know, people sometimes pride themselves on the fact that they can multitask.
Not during communication time. You can multitask, you can wipe the floor, you can be cooking dinner, you can be attending to something, but not through communication. Communication, you really need to be focused on the message that you are trying to deliver. You cannot be delivering a message and doing something else at the same time. Hence, at FPOS machines, you will sometimes put your card in and it won't go through because it's overcrowded or the line's busy or whatever it is. The same thing with communication. You really have to be focused on the task at hand. And to address your issue, at the end of it, you need to ask questions to clarify that your recipient has got the message that you want. to deliver. And also encourage questions from your recipient to make sure that they have understood the task. And that goes through with your parents, with your partner, your husband, your wife, with your training session, with staff at work, with your children, in a classroom setting. It's right across the board. And give opportunity for feedback, because communication is a two-way thing.
Absolutely. We have obviously just talked about verbal communication very briefly, but also just off that, I suppose you mentioned tone of voice and how a person should change their pitch or their tone of voice when communicating. In text, SMS, emails, you often lose that tone of voice. And the message that you're trying to convey might be taken and might be misinterpreted or misunderstood.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's the second component of communication, that is the non-verbal communication. And that is what's missing on Facebook, on a lot of the social media, on texting and so forth, because you're missing that element of emotional expression, physical expression. And of course, communication requires you, or not requires you, but inherent in communicating is when you're passing your ideas around, you're putting your opinion, your feelings mixed in with the facts, if it's a factual kind of delivery of message. So you do have that non-verbal communication. And in non-verbal, we have eye contact, we have the position, the posture. I love dogs when they are listening. If you have a dog, if you have a pet at home, and then somebody's passing, they suddenly are very erect, their ears are perked up, their tail's ready, and they take this position that, they're going to attack or, listen attentively. I tell that to my listeners, to children in particular when I'm working with children, because, if you're listening with your whole body, you're going to get a lot more of the message than if you're listening while multitasking or doing something. I think sometimes we kid ourselves that we can do several things at one time, but with communication, you're not going to get the full message. You'll get some of the message. So your facial expression, somebody could be telling me something and they could be quite sad about it, and maybe their voice isn't expressing it, but their face will be expressing it. And if I'm not looking at their face, I've missed what 50% of that communication message. So facial expression is really important. And also, as a giver of the message, I need to look directly in my audience eyes, my child's face, my husband's face, my teammate's face, whoever it is that I'm communicating with, to make sure that the flow of idea has been transferred from here onto the person I'm communicating with. My voice as we express. Long time ago, when I was a young girl growing up and I was working in retail.
Long time ago? You mean just very recently?
Around the corner.
You're still very young.
Surprised. 30 years ago, I hasten to say 35, 40 years ago, when I first started working, and I was working in retail. Thank you, Matthew, you're very kind. A lot of the retail stores had actually policies on how many pieces of jewellery you wore when you fronted up to work. So you were only allowed 3 pieces of jewellery, and one of these was your watch. So you were left with maybe a pair of earrings and maybe a chain. And I kid you not, they would be standing at the door when you came to work, and if you had more than that, you were made to take them off, because they felt that cluttered you as a sales assistant in doing your job or in communicating the message. Now, some of these have been relaxed these days, but I think sometimes it pays to look at what you are wearing, because if you're, I read somewhere that dress for the job that you want to do. Okay, so I think you communicate a lot. Absolutely. And you see crims who have committed all sorts of crimes when they front up to court for their hearing. They're always, cleanly shaven, no earrings, no piercings, no tattoos showing, wearing suits and so forth. The image is important. So if you are going to work in an orphanage, obviously you're not going to go and wear a suit and dress up and so forth, because it's distancing you from the people that you're working with. But how we come across is really important in the messages that we give with what we wear and so forth. Another thing that's really important is personal space. So often we're saying something to the person at the end of the room or in another room and we're screaming it out. First, so you're missing out on the facial communication, the body gestures, the emotion that's invested in the message that you are passing across, and also the other person is unable to see your expression and so forth. And you see lovers or newly engaged couple, whatever, they're always very close together, they're holding hands, they're communicating. And you see husbands and wives who've been married for quite some time, start to sort of separate in distance. And when we do see an older couple still holding hands, it's a wonder, and I think your physical space is really important in the message that you're communicating. How close you stand to someone. With a child, you never ever discipline a child from standing up, you. You need to come down to their level and speak to them at their own level, so your communication becomes a very effective one. So becoming aware of our non-verbal communication, you see a lot of nationalities use their hands a lot in expression, and that may be good in some cultures. It may be seen as threatening in another culture. So just being aware of how we physically act can help us to use those things to our own advantage.
Absolutely, and those cultural barriers can often cause a big misunderstanding sometimes.
Absolutely. In some cultures, if you're a male and approaching a female and you get too close, that's seen as aggressive. But in others, they welcome that closeness, because then you can, say what you want to say and you can probably be heard and you can read the message. Of course, all within reasonable confines,
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned, obviously, personal space and body language. And they can often be completely misunderstood sometimes.
Absolutely.
With the message you're trying to convey.
Absolutely, and the more you are aware of that, the more you can make it work for you.
Absolutely. We all like to have harmonious relationships with our families and our close ones, our friends. But how can we communicate more effectively to help build those warm, positive relationships?
Look, I'm not an expert and I don't have an incredibly harmonious household, but I think the number one thing is listening. We were actually having this very discussion before I came to meet with you, Matt, today with my children. And we started with listening, that you really need to be an attentive listener, despite the fact that I think people who cohabitate together, that live together, tend to think that they know each other so well that they're going to guess what the other one's going to say before they open their mouth. And that's a danger that we all fall in. But it might be just this one time where we're guessing what the outcome is going to be, that person wants to say something different. So I think listening is really, really important. I think it's important that the person in front of you feels heard. In a lot of the hospitals or retails or whatever, they have the complaints group, who hear you when you've got a complaint to make. And all they do really is just listen. And somehow you're angry because of the service that you got was not up to your expectations. But once you go and tell someone about it, you come back thinking, I'm heard. And we can use that in our own lives. I think listening is a really powerful thing. But post-listening, you need to make sure that what you heard is the message intended. Yeah. So I think questioning, asking questions to clarify the point. The other thing...
That's really an important one sometimes.
Absolutely, and I think we don't always do that because first we think we know what the person is going to say to us. Secondly, we've heard it all before. So we might just think that asking questions is a bit of a silly thing. So I think, creating that dialogue to ensure that you've received the message accurately. And mind reading is another. We look at barriers really in communication, and maybe that's a good way to help us communicate more effectively. So sometimes comparing may take place. So you're telling me you have a headache today, and I might say, oh, well, yeah, I had one last week. So I'm not really listening to you. You've said something that's triggered something in my own mind, so I'm now going to share with you my experience. So that's not effective communication because I haven't let you share with me your experience. So comparing my story with yours. Mind reading. I'm going to guess what the next thing is going to be. You might have a bit of a whinge about your headache or whatever it is, or you're hungry or whatever your story is. So I'm going to be thinking about what I'm going to say to you. So I'm not really listening to you because I'm busy addressing in my mind what I'm going to say to you. Or if you're saying something to me that's a bit controversial, I might actually rehearse in my own mind how I'm going to combat your argument. So I'm not really listening to you. Or I'm listening to you with half an ear. I've heard Matt say this story before, so I'm listening to some of the words that you're saying, but I'm tuning out with some of it. I'm not really focused on what you're saying. I might even be judging you. I might say, oh, you know, he's a wimp, he can't put up with pain, you know, and go on about this, when in actual fact, this is your experience, and I need to listen and acknowledge the journey that I don't need to be judging you, whether you're good for it or bad for it. Or I might just completely tune out and dream and go off in La La Land while you go on about your issue. I might even take my high horse and start to advise you. You know, well, you should be taking this, you shouldn't have done that yesterday, that's why you've got the headache, you know, so I'm now taking the position of advising you. These are all barriers in effective communication, because look at all the things that I've done so far. I haven't really listened to you, and most of us would do that. I might even think about debating the fact that you've even got a headache. I might say, well, no, you haven't got a headache. So I'm even denying you, you know, what you're trying to communicate to me. Or I might derail you. I might take you off somewhere else and say, well, you know, tomorrow we're going to be doing this, this and that. So I've completely missed the opportunity to hear what you have to say. And it might be a precursor to something really serious. You might actually have a headache. You might be depressed, or you might have something else that you want to say, and you're getting my attention with that. So I think really listening is the key to unlocking the next thing. And then, you know, we can look at what happens after listening. Listening, giving response and feedback is also very important. Asking questions. Well, is this the first time you've had this headache? You know, how often? It's not meant to be a case history or anything like that, but engaging in what you're trying to say to me and how significant it is for you and the implications of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as communication is such a broad topic, that I think we're going to have to obviously have a whole series with you about this, which we'll probably do in the next series of the show. I just wanted to really thank you for your time tonight. We really appreciate you coming on the show. We understand you're a really busy person on very high demand, so we really appreciate it. I'm not a communication expert, but I think it's important for us no need to be modest.
to keep teasing out some of those issues that may hinder our fulfillment, because really we're communication animals. And we were talking before the starting of the tape that the thing that really separates us from the animal kingdom, I mean, animal kingdom is wonderful communicators, and they communicate for their survival and they communicate for their protection. And what really separates us from the animals, in my view, is our ability to problem solve and our ability to be creative in solving our issues. And if you look at all the successful scenarios, whether it be young couple facing issues, or parents working with their children, or children trying to get their parents on board for something, or team leaders, or whatever it is, the underlying thing is being creative with your problem solving. And it's really what determines the outcome. How you solve those issues collectively, and be creative about the way you address those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, thank you very much for your time tonight. We really appreciate you coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So, now we'll head to Mina and Malik for Melbourne Madness.
I need you to focus. Why don't you understand? It's perfectly simple. The translocation of the theoretical variables demonstrates the time-dependent relativity of the formula. Therefore, by substituting the equation, we can see that we satisfy the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Are there any questions? I think not. Go.
When could we go outside and clean out? I'm wooden, I'm tired. Let's go out and play.
Thanks for that, Mina. So tonight I've got some points to help you maintain effective communication. Number one is always maintain eye contact. This is not only proper etiquette, but it also shows that you're listening and you're interested in what the other person is saying. This brings us to our next tip, listening attentively. Active listening means that you make small gestures or comments while listening to the other person, such as nodding or smiling if appropriate, as well as acknowledging by saying yes or uh-huh. Number 3 is body language and posture. This is very important. You have to be sure to maintain a relaxed but not slouched posture and face the person speaking. It sometimes helps if you mirror the other person's body language as well. Things to avoid would be crossing your arms, fidgeting and being distracted. 4th is patience and understanding. During your communications with others, always give them time to communicate and express themselves. Wait till they finish, show empathy if necessary, and very importantly, ask questions or make comments to ensure you have a clear understanding of what is being communicated. And last but not least is to animate your voice. Avoid using monotone, use dynamics, consider volume and clearly articulate your words, saying your words clearly and effectively. So that's my catch of the week. Back to you, Maddie.
So, as we wrap up another episode, always remember that the recipient might not interpret the same message that you're trying to convey. Sometimes you try to be nice to people, but they take it the wrong way. And that rhymes, eh? Always try to communicate to people at their level, just like our Lord Jesus Christ did. He spoke to people in parables that they could understand. He spoke to the fishermen at the lake of Tiberias, using fish and other things that they knew. He spoke to the farmers and the sowers who went, using the parable of a sower who went out to sow in Matthew chapter 13, because he knew they would be able to relate to it and comprehend it. And he spoke to the shepherds using the parable of the lost sheep. And he spoke to the women who loved their jewellery using the parable of the lost coin. So for everyone who used the appropriate type of communication and used terms that they could understand and comprehend and relate to. Always consider the recipients of your message. Like Jesus Christ did, our Master. You know, he empathised with them. He put himself in their position so that he could build rapport with them and convey his message. There's no point talking to a 4-year-old about a PhD in genetics and biomedical science because they're not going to have a clue what you're talking about. St. James provides us with some great advice when communicating. In James chapter 1, verse 19, he says, "Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger." After all, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. I mean, you know what I mean. 2 ears and 1 mouth. So that we can listen twice as much as we talk. So, thanks again for joining us tonight. We hope you enjoyed tonight's episode, and please remember to send us your feedback and suggestions, and make sure you tune in next time because God willing, there'll be another enthralling discussion. Till then, on behalf of our whole team, take care, God bless, and have a great night.
Are you ready? Let's go.
Might not interpret the same message that you're trying to convey. Sometimes you're trying to be nice to people and they take it the wrong way. Hey, I like that.
And it's perfectly simple. The translocation? Transposition, sorry.
Really. When could we let our
Alright, I'm sorry. Alright, start again. Sorry.
Perfectly simple by... Ready? Okay, again. All right. The transposition, okay.